Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world that smells faintly of yeast, smoke, and a hint of exhaustion. The world of medieval bakers who literally slept beside their ovens. You might picture a soft candlelight and warm, crusty loaves, but no, you probably wouldn't survive this shift. Their nights were long, air thick with flour dust, their beds just a few feet from roaring brick furnaces. Still, there was a strange comfort in it, a rhythm of heat and heartbeat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where everyone's drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink in the dim half-light of a medieval bakery, the air thick with flour and sleep. The room hums quietly, not with conversation, but with the low, rhythmic breathing of a furnace. You can feel its warmth against your cheek before your eyes even open. It's not a home, not exactly, but it's where you sleep because it's where you must live. You are a baker, and in the Middle Ages, that meant the oven owned your nights. The reason medieval bakers slept beside their ovens was brutally simple: time and temperature. Bread took hours to rise, hours to bake, and seconds to burn. You couldn't risk leaving it unattended. So instead of heading home, you stayed. You curled up on straw pallets in a corner, or sometimes directly on the warm flagstones. And if you were lucky, you got 2 hours of rest between dough batches.
The heat was your comfort and your clock. You'd stir half asleep, feeling the oven's breath fade slightly, meaning it was time to stoke the fire again. Some bakers claimed they could judge the perfect baking temperature just by the smell. Sweet ash, one guild rulebook called it. You'd stumble over to toss in another log, then drift back to your makeshift nest. And if you nodded off completely, well, your bread could burn, and that might cost you your reputation, or worse, a fine from the guild. Historians still argue whether this habit of sleeping beside the oven was more out of necessity or custom. Some say bakers simply had no time to return home between batches. Others suggest it became a badge of honor, proof of devotion to the craft. "No one works harder than the baker," wrote a French chronicler in the 1300s. "Even in his sleep, he dreams of bread." You can almost see it, the dream of dough rising like clouds, of loaves turning golden in that endless heat. You stretch, imagining the coarse wool of your tunic clinging with sweat, your hair sticky from smoke. The bakery smells wonderful and terrible all at once. Yeast, soot, humanity. You hear the faint crackle of fire, the shifting of embers. Maybe there's a cat tucked in the corner, eyes glowing. Bakers liked cats. They kept the rats away, and at this hour, you needed all the help you could get.
Some people actually envied bakers for that heat. In winter, when the rest of the town shivered through icy nights, your workshop glowed like a hearth. Strangers sometimes knocked at the bakery door just to warm their hands for a few seconds. You'd grunt, maybe hand them a stale roll, and send them off again. Warmth was a currency. You just happened to sleep in its vault. There's a strange intimacy to this existence, half awake, half working, body attuned to the crackle of wood and the soft sigh of fermenting dough. You're surrounded by barrels of flour, stacked like sleeping giants, by sacks of grain you've guarded more fiercely than gold. Flour was precious. A single spoiled bag could ruin you. So you slept near your livelihood, the way a shepherd curls beside his flock. But the sleep itself was odd, shallow, rhythmic, synchronized with the bread. You'd rest between proofs, between firings, sometimes sitting upright. Some apprentices told stories of masters who'd doze mid-need, one hand still sinking into the dough like a metronome. You laugh softly at the image. It's ridiculous, but somehow believable. Humans adapt to everything, even this. By dawn, your limbs ache from the stone floor, your back damp from the oven's breath. But the town is already stirring. People queue outside for the first loaves, steaming, fragrant, the reward of your sleepless night. You blink into the cold morning air, eyes gritty but proud. You survived another night beside the fire. You might even whisper a small thank you to it.
The quirkier historians like to point out that sleeping near the oven wasn't unique to bakers. In fact, in medieval Europe, warmth was so scarce that even blacksmiths and potters sometimes napped by their kilns. But the baker's vigil became almost legendary, part of urban folklore. There's a record from 14th century Paris of a baker who claimed he slept better with the dough than with his wife, because at least the dough rose predictably. You grin at that line, equal parts tragic and true. Some nights, exhaustion blurred everything together. You'd dream of bread, endless dough, rising, falling, talking to you like a mischievous spirit. When you woke, it was impossible to tell if you'd actually tended to it or just dreamed that you did. That's how bakers sometimes burned a batch without even realizing. Not malice, just fatigue. And yet, amid all this sweat and soot, there was peace. You could feel time in its rawest form, not by bells or clocks, but by heat and smell. A kind of ancient mindfulness born out of survival. You weren't just baking bread. You were holding together the rhythm of an entire town's morning. You lean back now, feeling that oven warmth seep through you. The world outside is cold and quiet and far away. In this little pocket of heat and hum, you almost understand why those medieval bakers stayed. Maybe it wasn't only about the dough. Maybe it was about belonging to the fire, to the work, to the night itself.
The oven breathes like a living creature beside you, exhaling slow, smoky sighs that roll through the room. Its bricks glow faintly in the dark, a pulse of red fading to black. You can almost hear it thinking. That low hum is the sound of civilization itself learning to control fire, one loaf at a time. Before there were ovens, there were flames, wild, open, temperamental things, and humanity's long, smoky romance with bread began long before the Middle Ages, though it was there, in those narrow stone bakeries, that fire truly became furniture. You sit up and stretch, feeling the stiffness in your spine. The oven before you isn't the modern kind. No polished knobs or timers, just a thick dome of stone and clay shaped like a beehive. Medieval bakers called it a four à pain or a furnace, depending on where they lived. The technology was simple, elegant, and demanding. You'd build up a roaring fire inside the dome, let it heat for hours, then rake out the embers. Only then, when the stones shimmered with stored heat, could the dough go in. No constant flame, just radiant warmth, the memory of fire.
Imagine tending that kind of oven. There's no thermostat, no clock. You test the temperature by instinct. Toss in a handful of flour, watch how fast it browns, or stick your arm inside for a few seconds and try not to yelp. You learned the oven's moods like a pet's, how much wood it liked, how fast it cooled, which spots baked unevenly. Some bakers even gave theirs names: Old Ember, St. Martha, the Belly. It's oddly poetic naming something that could roast you alive if you weren't careful. The transition from open hearths to these enclosed ovens changed everything. Before, bread was baked on flat stones near the fire or in pots buried in coals, rough, unpredictable methods. The new ovens allowed consistency, and consistency meant commerce.
Villages grew into towns around their bakeries, and people began paying for loaves instead of making them. You can trace urbanization itself through the rise of the oven. That quiet dome in front of you is, quite literally, a monument to human order. You feel the irony, though. The more controlled the fire became, the less freedom the baker had. The oven dictated your day, or your night, rather. You couldn't leave once it was hot. The rhythm was relentless: heat, bake, cool, reheat. Sleep came in broken fragments between firings. So, naturally, you stayed near it. The oven became your bedfellow, dependable, sometimes cranky, always hot. In those centuries, most bakeries weren't private. They were part of bakehouses shared by entire neighborhoods. Poorer families couldn't afford their own ovens, so they'd knead dough at home and carry it through the streets to the communal baker. Imagine trudging through dawn mist, clutching your lump of dough wrapped in cloth. You'd stamp your initials on it, a primitive name tag, so you could find it again later. The baker would line up dozens of loaves, all different shapes, all destined for one fiery belly.
A quirky detail: some villages in France and England had official oven days. The baker would sound a horn, signaling that the communal fire was ready. Everyone came running with their dough, chattering like gossiping birds. It was equal parts domestic chore and social event, a medieval bake-off. And when the last loaves were pulled out, the oven's residual heat was used for slow roasting vegetables or drying herbs. Nothing wasted. But even in this shared arrangement, someone had to guard the oven overnight, feed it, monitor it, whisper to it in the small hours. That was your job. You, the baker, the keeper of warmth. You were the one who never slept deeply. The smell in here is hypnotic. Baked crust mingling with smoke, a perfume of survival. Your clothes reek of it. You'll never wash it out completely. That's why bakers were instantly recognizable in medieval towns, dusted in flour like ghosts, smelling faintly of toast. There's an old joke from a London tavern: you can find a baker in the dark, just sniff. Maybe not the most flattering scent, but one everyone depended on. There's a fringe theory, the kind only romantic historians entertain, that sleeping beside the oven helped bakers develop sharper olfactory senses. Some claim experienced bakers could detect changes in fermentation just by smell. Whether that's true or not, the intimacy between human and oven was real. The fire wasn't just heat, it was a partner, a mirror, sometimes even a rival. It demanded attention, and it punished neglect.
At this hour, long past midnight, you sit listening to the oven crackle. Somewhere outside, church bells mark the canonical hours, matins or lauds, but in here, the only rhythm that matters is thermal. You rake a few coals, check the damp cloth over your dough. The air trembles with heat. This is your world, defined by red and gold, ash and bread. You think about how much life revolved around these structures. Entire neighborhoods gathered here for warmth in winter, gossiping as they waited for bread. Some even brought sick children to lie near the oven's mouth, hoping the heat would draw out the chill. That's not just folklore. Warmth therapy was a real medieval medical practice. They believed heat purified, restored, blessed, and in some small way they weren't wrong. The oven itself becomes almost symbolic, a controlled sun burning at the center of every community. Its light fed people, its smoke marked the rhythm of the day. When you sleep beside it, you're sleeping beside civilization itself. You're not just a baker. You're a guardian of continuity, ensuring that tomorrow will begin with bread and warmth and the smell of something alive. You smile faintly, drifting on that thought. The oven hums steady and deep. Maybe that's why bakers slept there, not just for convenience or heat, but for comfort. The comfort of knowing that even as the world outside froze or burned, your little corner glowed with purpose.
You wipe a streak of soot from your cheek and glance toward the wooden door, where dawn light will eventually leak through.
But for now, it's still the blue-black hour between midnight and morning, the hour ruled by the Bakers' Guild. Those guilds were everywhere in the medieval city. Tailors, weavers, candle makers, smiths, yet few were as strict or as sleepless as the bakers. The guild dictated almost everything: how much you could charge, how heavy your loaves must be, what kind of fuel could feed your oven, and, amusingly enough, when you could take a nap. The regulations weren't just about money, they were about trust. Bread was the city's heartbeat, and if a baker cheated with light loaves or spoiled grain, it wasn't just a bad sale, it was a betrayal of faith. So you, the humble baker, lived under the warmth of the oven and the cold shadow of the guild charter. Somewhere above your workbench, tacked to the wall, hung a copy of the Assize of Bread, that ancient code first written in England around 1266. It declared that every loaf must weigh according to the day's grain price. Too light, and you could be fined or even tossed into the stocks for public shame. Too heavy, and, well, congratulations, you just lost money. Historians still argue whether these guild laws were protection for consumers or convenient ways to keep bakers exhausted and obedient. Either way, they shaped the rhythm of your nights. Apprentices could only bake under supervision. Journeymen needed years before earning the title of master. And everyone, regardless of rank, had to sleep somewhere near the oven.
You picture a row of straw mats lined along the wall, apprentices bundled in wool like flour-dusted caterpillars. Their snores mix with the crackle of wood. One stirs, muttering a half-dreamed recipe, "More salt, master, more salt," and rolls over. You can't help but smile. You were that apprentice once, terrified of burning the bread, terrified of waking late for the dawn shift. Guild inspectors were known to arrive unannounced at sunrise. They'd tap loaves with polished rods, slice them open, sniff, weigh, and occasionally confiscate your best batch for sampling, a kind of medieval quality control with a side of breakfast theft. To keep standards high, guilds imposed curfews. A baker's fire had to be lit by a certain hour, the last batch out by another. If the oven glowed too late into the night, neighbors might complain or, worse, suspect you of selling secret loaves without paying dues. The city watch sometimes made their rounds specifically to sniff out the smell of unauthorized baking. Imagine that. Patrols walking through sleeping streets, noses twitching for illegal bread. Still, despite the strictness, the guild was also family. When you fell sick, they brought broth. When your oven collapsed, a common disaster, they helped rebuild it. And if an apprentice burned himself or lost a finger, the guild funded the salve and bandages. In a world with no insurance, that meant survival.
But you couldn't ignore the hierarchy. Masters owned the ovens, journeymen rented hours, apprentices slept closest to the floor. The nearer you were to the fire, the lower your status, though in winter that was the better bed. You learned early that success wasn't just about good dough, it was about endurance. There's a quirky record from Nuremberg in 15th century that describes a baker's night bell, a small handbell rung every hour to signal tasks: feed fire, check rise, shape dough, bake. Apprentices hated that sound. It meant no real sleep. You imagine being jerked awake by that metallic chime, fumbling for your ladle to stir the starter. The bell's tone probably still echoes in your dreams. And yet, the discipline worked. Cities depended on bakers like you. Without the guild's routines, mornings would fall apart. People woke expecting bread the way they expected sunrise. No bread meant panic, riots even. There's a grim French proverb from the 1300s: "A hungry town burns its bakery first." You'd laugh if it weren't so true. To keep peace, mayors often gave bakers special privileges, freedom from night curfew, exemption from certain taxes, sometimes even the right to bear small arms for protection. Bread was that serious. And because you never slept like ordinary citizens, you became a kind of nocturnal breed, half craftsman, half guardian. Historians still debate whether guild life stifled innovation. Some claim it preserved skill and purity. Others say it trapped bakers in medieval Groundhog Day, repeating the same recipes forever. But when you think about those nights, you realize repetition was the point. Predictability bred trust. The same loaf, the same warmth every morning. Comfort in a chaotic world.
There were rituals, too. Before lighting the first fire, bakers often crossed themselves or muttered blessings to Saint Honoré, patron saint of bakers and pastry chefs. Some left a crumb from the last batch in the corner of the oven for luck or for the fire's spirit, a bit of superstition to keep disaster at bay. You might chuckle, but when your living depends on heat and hope, you cling to every charm available. As you settle against the oven wall now, the heat licking through your tunic, you think of the countless hands that followed this rhythm before you. Guild masters with their wax seals, apprentices with their soot-smudged faces, all bound by one unspoken oath: keep the fire alive. You close your eyes, hearing the faint rasp of a quill scratching parchment in the guild hall, someone recording another day's loaves. Bureaucracy and bread, two forces holding medieval life together. You smirk at the thought. Somewhere in the future, people will buy bread from glowing machines, never thinking about the sleepless souls who once dreamed beside ovens. But here, in this age of soot and schedules, you're part of something strangely noble. You're not just baking, you're keeping a covenant with the city, one warm, fragrant promise at a time.
The night drifts on, slower than molasses. The fire breathes, the walls sweat, and you feel time bending around the oven's glow. Your hands move automatically now. Knead, fold, rest, turn, guided by instinct more than thought. It's the same rhythm repeated every night, yet somehow it never feels entirely the same. Bread, you realize, is alive. The dough swells beneath your fingers, warm from the fire, exhaling tiny sighs through bubbles of fermentation. You can almost hear it. Medieval bakers didn't talk about yeast cultures the way modern ones do. They just called it the mother, a living mass that had to be fed and protected. If you let her die, you risked more than bad bread. You lost the heart of your bakery. Before commercial yeast, every baker guarded a lump of old dough from the last batch, mixing it into the new one. That bit of fermented magic carried the flavor of countless loaves before it. In a sense, you were baking history itself, each loaf a descendant of the last. Some bakeries kept their starters alive for decades. A few monasteries, legends claim, maintained unbroken starters for centuries, passed from abbot to abbot like holy relics. Historians still argue whether that's true or just romantic myth. You press your palms into the dough, feeling it yield and resist, soft as skin, alive with breath. The air smells faintly sour, warm, comforting. You can taste tomorrow in it already. The oven's hum wraps around you like a lullaby. Somewhere outside, a rooster stirs too early, confused by the glow from your window.
The ingredients themselves tell stories. Flour, coarse and gray, milled from local grain. Water drawn from the town well, sometimes clean, sometimes questionably so. Salt hauled from distant coasts. Each element a journey, each grain a fragment of the medieval world. You picture fields rippling with wheat,
the grinding of millstones, the clatter of carts delivering sacks at dusk. The loaf you're shaping now has touched more lives than most people ever will. Still, baking in this age isn't glamorous. You mix by hand, knead until your arms burn, and shovel wood until your back feels like splintered oak. The oven heat can sear skin in seconds, and the soot, it never leaves. You wash, but your nails stay black, your lungs cough up dust. The city knows your trade by the calluses on your hands and the faint wheeze in your breath. There's a medieval medical text that calls bakers the men of heat and heaviness. Doctors back then believed your temperament was shaped by your work. Too much fire, too much warmth, and you became choleric, irritable, feverish, prone to passion. You laugh under your breath. Maybe that's why bakers shouted so much at apprentices. Or maybe it was just sleep deprivation. You move quietly around the room, checking the dough on the benches. The starter bubbles gently like something dreaming. Beside it, a bucket of water catches the firelight, shimmering gold. You dip your fingers in, flicking a few drops toward the oven, an old superstition for luck. The droplets hiss and vanish. You grin. The night is long, but the rituals keep it bearable.
There's another fringe theory that medieval bakers' sleep habits made them early risers by evolutionary design. You worked while everyone else slept, your body adapting to nocturnal rhythms. Some modern sleep scientists even compare you to firefighters or nurses, the ancient prototypes of shift workers. But unlike them, you didn't have artificial light or caffeine or scheduled breaks, just heat, bread, and willpower. Your thoughts drift as you shape loaves, round, plump ones for the wealthy, long, rough ones for the poor. The rich get white flour, pure, sifted, delicate. The poor get rye and bran, dark and dense. The hierarchy of bread mirrors the hierarchy of people. You wonder if anyone ever noticed how political a loaf could be. The difference between a manchet, fine bread, and a macelin, mixed grain loaf, could mark your social class. At royal feasts, white bread gleamed on golden platters. In peasant huts, black bread sat heavy and humble. And yet, the flavor of hardship lingered longer in memory. People might forget the softness of a rich man's crust, but not the chew of survival. You think of a small joke whispered among apprentices: the whiter the bread, the blacker the soul. Maybe not entirely fair, but it made them laugh through the night. Some loaves are ready now. You dust them with flour, carve small slashes on top, crosses, leaves, stars. Not for decoration, though that helps. The cuts let steam escape and give each loaf its personality. In some villages, bakers even marked loaves with initials or symbols. Early branding, centuries before logos existed.
You glance toward the oven mouth, glowing like a small sunrise. It's ready. You slide the wooden peel under the first loaf, guide it into the heat. The air shimmers, the crust hisses as it meets the stone. You feel a strange satisfaction watching the dough swell, expand, transform. This is the part that never gets old, the quiet magic of chemistry that medieval minds could only call divine. They believed bread was sacred, and maybe they weren't wrong. Every loaf had meaning. It fed bodies, yes, but it also bound communities. It was used in offerings, in oaths, in rituals of peace and forgiveness. Even now you feel it, this weight of history in your hands. A soft knock at the door startles you, the miller perhaps, or a fellow baker passing by. You open it to a gust of cold air. Outside, the street is silent, except for the faint clop of a distant horse. You trade a few sleepy words, grain deliveries, gossip, complaints about damp firewood, and then you shut the door again. The world narrows back to warmth. When you finally sit, it's not exactly to rest, it's to listen.
The fire pops. The loaves crackle as they rise. You close your eyes, breathing slow, matching your pulse to the rhythm of baking. There's a strange comfort in the monotony, like rocking in a cradle made of stone and flame. You wonder if centuries from now people will envy this simplicity, this direct communion between hand and heat. Probably not, you think, with a sleepy grin. They'll invent machines to do it all, and then invent podcasts to tell them what it used to feel like. The thought makes you laugh quietly. The oven joins in, exhaling another smoky sigh, as if agreeing. You lie half awake beside the oven's faint hum, the warm breath of coals whispering through the vents. Outside, the town sleeps. Inside, the room quivers with the pulse of fire. Every flicker throws shadows across beams and sacks of flour, soft ghosts that sway like dancers keeping time with your heartbeat. The bakery is never silent. It murmurs with expansion and contraction, with hissing embers, settling wood, and the small sighs of dough proofing nearby. For a medieval baker, warmth was comfort, but also peril. The oven was the heart of life, and just as easily, its destroyer. Across towns and cities, from York to Bruges, from Florence to Prague, records describe the same terror. Bakeries catching fire in the night, sending flames leaping through timber roofs, spreading from one gabled house to another. One spark, one puff of air through an open vent could turn livelihood into ruin before the bell of matins rang. You can almost hear it, the crack that begins small, like the snapping of a twig, the sound that makes a baker's blood run cold. Every instinct demands vigilance, but sleep must come eventually. Many bakers learn to drift between worlds, one ear tuned to the hiss of embers, one hand resting on a paddle where the oven's stone lip. The warmth that lulled them could never fully be trusted. In medieval towns, open flame was a neighbor everyone feared but needed. Fire baked bread, forged iron, brewed ale, and shaped clay. It was holy and dangerous, sacred and mundane. To tame it required daily reverence. In some places, bakers kept a small bowl of holy water near the hearth, sprinkled before lighting each morning's first fire. In others, a sprig of rosemary or laurel was burned with the first kindling to charm the flames into obedience.
By city ordinance, bakers were sometimes required to keep buckets of sand, water, or even beer at hand. Beer worked surprisingly well. It smothered flames and cooled embers quickly, and in a baker's house there was always plenty. Still, accidents came. The Chronicles of London mention whole streets razed by bakery blazes. The one that began in Pudding Lane in 1666 would later devour most of the city, though it started centuries after these humble nights you're imagining now. The fear, however, was the same long before that disaster. To sleep near a living flame meant sleeping with caution. Bakers developed rituals, almost superstitions, to keep themselves safe. Some left a peel, a long wooden shovel propped between the oven and door, so that if they woke suddenly in smoke, they could feel their way out. Others marked the floor with chalk before lying down, drawing a half circle around the oven's mouth as a boundary, part prayer, part habit. In certain towns of France, it was believed that whistling near a flame would call the devil. Apprentices who did so were cuffed sharply, told that mischief in the air could make the fire turn wild. More quietly, masters muttered a line from the Psalms before banking the coals. "Keep me as the apple of thy eye, hide me under the shadow of thy wings." The language of bread and faith intertwined naturally. A baker's day began and ended with the same element, fire that gave both life and warning.
You imagine yourself rising to check the oven door again. The iron latch is hot but steady. The fire inside glows like the heart of some slow animal, alive yet patient. The smell is rich and clean, oak and dough,
the faint tang of ash. You feed a few more chips into the vent, watching them flare, then settle into steady orange. For a moment you stand, transfixed, seeing faces form in the coals, a trick of exhaustion maybe, or the mind's way of turning heat into company. Flame taught respect. Bakers learned early that haste ruined both bread and lives. The wrong wood, a green log or a resinous pine, could smoke and poison the dough. Too fierce a blaze could blacken an entire batch. The fire had to be coaxed, persuaded, not commanded. That skill earned admiration. To keep a clean flame became a proverb for discipline and patience, a quiet virtue that townsfolk recognized. When inspectors or guild wardens made their rounds, they judged not only loaves, but also the hearth. A tidy, well-kept oven showed pride and piety. An ashen, neglected one whispered of carelessness. In some guild statutes, repeated fire accidents could cost a baker his license. No wonder the craft bred a peculiar kind of insomnia, the alert rest of one who must wake every few hours to tend his livelihood. And so fear became routine. It lost its sharpness, softened into a dull companionship. The baker learned to live with it, to make it part of the rhythm of night. Each time he rose to check the draft, each time he brushed sparks from his sleeve, he reaffirmed his control over the very thing that could consume him. There was dignity in that constant, quiet vigilance.
Occasionally, you'd hear stories, half legend, half truth, of bakers saved by miracles. One tale from Lübeck tells of a journeyman who fell asleep while proofing rye loaves. The Virgin Mary appeared in his dream, warning him to wake. When he did, the thatch above him was already smoldering. Another from southern France claims a guardian cat once leapt onto its master's chest just before the rafters ignited. The cat survived, though the baker swore its fur glowed faintly for days. These tales may sound quaint now, but they reflect a deeper reality. To those who lived by fire, each night was a negotiation with danger. The warmth that cradled them was borrowed, never owned. And in that uneasy alliance, people found meaning, a daily rehearsal of faith and responsibility. So as you lie here in this imagined bakery, think of the thousands before you who shared that same half-sleep. Hear the pop of sap in the logs, feel the faint tremor of heat against your cheek. Beyond the walls, snow might fall, or rain might whisper along the gutters, but inside, the oven keeps its steady breath. Flames and fear, creation and ruin, a baker's lullaby. The fire that could take everything away is also the one that keeps you alive.
You wake to the toll of the bell. It is still dark, though the faintest gray has begun to leak into the window's edge. The fire in the oven has sunk to a drowsy orange glow. You stretch, brush the flour from your hair, and begin again. The town has rules, always rules, and the baker lives within their narrow walls as tightly as dough inside a mold. Bread is no simple food here. It is the staff of life, the measure of justice, the soul of every morning. And because it is sacred, the making of it is policed. In your time, bread was not a private affair. It belonged to the realm of law and weight, of royal decrees and guild ledgers. Each loaf had to be true, honest, and fair, its size and price set not by whim, but by statute. Imagine stepping out into the street at dawn, the air sharp with frost. A town crier's voice echoes down the cobbles. By order of the council, the price of wheat is set this week at 4 sous the bushel. That single number changes everything. You calculate quickly, adjusting your recipes, your weights, your profit, what little there is. For centuries, governments feared famine and riot above all else, and so they fixed the price of bread to calm the bellies of the poor. A loaf too small or too dear could spark unrest faster than any sermon. To guard against deceit, the assize of bread in England and its counterparts across Europe dictated precisely how much a loaf should weigh for a given price. Inspectors, known sometimes as ale conners or bread weighers, walked the streets with small brass scales, stopping at bakeries to test loaves fresh from the oven. They would weigh your bread, examine its crust, and pronounce judgment aloud.
If found wanting, if too light, too small, too coarse, you could be fined, or worse, shamed. Some towns forced dishonest bakers to stand in the marketplace with their bad loaves hung around their necks. Others dunked them into cold rivers by pulley, a punishment known grimly as the baker's baptism. Yet the profession endured, and even the most honest bakers occasionally added a little extra, one loaf beyond the dozen, as a safeguard against error. Thus was born the baker's dozen, 13 for the price of 12, a small hedge against the unforgiving scale of law. You glance at the iron weights beside your workbench, the small stamped discs bearing the seal of the guild. Each represents not just mass, but trust. To cheat the weight of bread was to betray the town itself. Yet every baker knew the quiet temptations, a poor harvest, a greedy landlord, a child to feed. In such times, the difference between survival and sin was measured in crumbs. Guilds tried to help, though they also constrained. To join one, you had to prove your worth through long apprenticeships, years spent waking before dawn, carrying sacks, learning the precise touch of dough under palm and knuckle. When you finally earned the title of master baker, you swore oaths before witnesses to keep fair measure, to light no fire before curfew bells, to sell bread only of honest grain. The oath bound your soul as tightly as any contract. The guild also determined when you could bake, how much you could sell, even where your stall could stand in the market. It was both protection and prison. Without it, you were a rogue baker, forbidden from trading inside the walls. With it, you gained community, recognition, and access to the town's sacred commodity, flour.
Flour was power. In many cities, the mills were owned by the lord or the church. You could not grind your own grain without paying toll. Some bakers tried, secretly using hand mills by night, but discovery brought heavy fines. The lord's officers were vigilant. They knew the scent of illicit grinding well. Thus, every loaf carried within it not only the work of your hands, but the invisible web of taxes, decrees, and privilege. Still, the people depended on you. When famine threatened, it was often the baker's door they knocked upon first. Stretch the dough, they begged, make it last. And sometimes you did, mixing barley or oats, even ground acorns into the wheat to keep hunger at bay. Such loaves were darker, denser, but they sustained life. In those years, no one complained about weight. You recall the town's bread court, a small weekly assembly held in the shadow of the cathedral. There disputes were aired, a buyer accusing a baker of short measure, a baker defending himself against false claims. The alderman would listen, weigh the loaves again, and deliver his verdict. Justice in such moments was tangible. You could hold it in your hand, smell its crust, break it apart to see if it was hollow. To bake was, in a sense, to enter into covenant with society. Each loaf was a promise fulfilled, each crust a seal of honesty. And because of this, bakers were often seen as moral barometers of the town. A good baker meant good fortune, a deceitful one, divine warning. Priests preached sermons using bread as metaphor for virtue. A man must rise like honest dough, not puffed with pride, but filled with truth.
The laws shaped more than loaves, they shaped lives. Your day was built around them, your dreams bounded by their edges. You learned to keep one eye on the oven and another on the watchman's lantern outside. You learned to measure twice, to weigh thrice, to nod humbly when the inspector praised your crust. And when all the loaves were done, lined neatly on the wooden table, golden and fragrant, you took a small one aside. The God's loaf, some called it. It was placed on the sill or given to the poor, a quiet gesture that asked for protection in return. Perhaps the laws had taught you caution, but custom had taught you grace. Now, as dawn breaks fully and footsteps echo beyond your door, you think again of that balance between rule and mercy. The scales of law might be cold, but they also keep chaos at bay. You wipe your hands, set the next batch to proof, and feel the slow satisfaction of honest work. Outside, a customer knocks. The world, bound by its weights and measures, continues. And you, keeper of bread, watcher of fire, servant of both hunger and justice, move within it like a steady clock, one loaf at a time.
You were once the sleepy apprentice, not the master, the one whose bed wasn't really a bed, just a sack of straw tucked near the oven's warm flank. You remember that first night. The sharp tang of yeast in the air, the heavy clang of the peel against the oven floor, and the ache in your arms from kneading dough for hours. You'd barely closed your eyes before someone shouted, "Up! Feed the fire!" That was your initiation into the baker's watch, the long, sleepless shift that began when the town slept. You were the night's caretaker, the small, flickering human tethered to the great heartbeat of fire. Apprentices like you were cheap labor, true, but you were also the insurance that no flame went out and no batch burned. The oven slept lightly. You slept lighter still. The watch began at dusk. Your master would head to bed, if he was lucky, while you swept the floor, sorted grain sacks, and mixed the preferment. It was called the biga in Italy, the levain in France, the mother in England. Whatever the word, it meant life. You stirred the bubbling starter, feeling it sigh under your spoon. Sometimes you whispered to it. The older bakers said that helped the yeast grow kinder. It was during these hours that you learned the rhythm of heat. Too much fire, and the oven roared like an angry beast. Too little, and the bread rose sullen and pale. You'd sit cross-legged before the open mouth of the oven, reading the flames as if they were letters. The color told you everything. The yellow hiss of sapwood, the deep red pulse of coals ready for baking. Your master might test your eye, asking, "Tell me, boy, is the oven white yet?" You'd lean in, squint, and answer carefully. If you guessed wrong, there'd be no supper for you. The guilds had rules about apprenticeships, too. You were bound to your master for 7 years, maybe longer. During that time, you received little pay, but you learned everything: how to shape dough, how to manage customers, how to endure the endless heat. You were the lowest rung on the ladder, but also its foundation. Without you, the bread wouldn't happen. Without you, the oven would grow cold. Some nights you envied the cats who slinked between flour sacks. They seemed freer than you. But there was something almost tender about the camaraderie among apprentices. You shared crusts, swapped jokes, and competed to see whose dough rose fastest. The older ones played tricks, smearing soot on the handle of the peel so you'd grab it and leave a black handprint on your face. You'd curse, they'd laugh, and then everyone went back to work. If you nodded off mid-shift, the punishment was simple and effective: a ladle of cold water to the neck. One master in Rouen supposedly tied a bell to his apprentice's wrist. If the ringing stopped, So did the apprenticeship. It sounds cruel now, but sleep was dangerous in a bakery. A single missed stoke of the fire could mean disaster. And so you learned the art of waking before you were fully asleep, a strange limbo that mirrored the half-dreaming hum of your life. Still, there were moments of magic. You remember the hush just before dawn, when the town was silent and the loaves were rising perfectly in their baskets. The air was thick with promise. You'd hear the faint whistle of the wind down the chimney, the crackle of wood shrinking to embers, and the slow exhale of steam from the dough. It was beautiful, in a quiet, gritty way. The guilds had rules about apprenticeships, too. You were bound to your master for 7 years, maybe longer. During that time, you received little pay, but you learned everything: how to shape dough, how to manage customers, how to endure the endless heat. You were the lowest rung on the ladder, but also its foundation. Without you, the bread wouldn't happen. Without you, the oven would grow cold. Some nights you envied the cats who slinked between flour sacks. They seemed freer than you. But there was something almost tender about the camaraderie among apprentices. You shared crusts, swapped jokes, and competed to see whose dough rose fastest. The older ones played tricks, smearing soot on the handle of the peel so you'd grab it and leave a black handprint on your face. You'd curse, they'd laugh, and then everyone went back to work. If you nodded off mid-shift, the punishment was simple and effective: a ladle of cold water to the neck. One master in Rouen supposedly tied a bell to his apprentice's wrist. If the ringing stopped, so did the apprenticeship. It sounds cruel now, but sleep was dangerous in a bakery. A single missed stoke of the fire could mean disaster. And so you learned the art of waking before you were fully asleep, a strange limbo that mirrored the half-dreaming hum of your life. Still, there were moments of magic. You remember the hush just before dawn, when the town was silent and the loaves were rising perfectly in their baskets. The air was thick with promise. You'd hear the faint whistle of the wind down the chimney, the crackle of wood shrinking to embers, and the slow exhale of steam from the dough. It was beautiful, in a quiet, gritty way.
Some apprentices found humor in their fate. They'd carve little faces into the dough scraps, smiling ones mostly, and bake them secretly in the corner of the oven. Later, they'd place the tiny loaves on the windowsill to ward off bad luck or to make the passing girls laugh. Baker's humor was always a bit strange. Equal parts superstition, exhaustion, and too much heat. Historians still argue whether apprenticeships like yours were more opportunity or exploitation. On one hand, the guild system gave you a future. On the other, it trapped you in a rigid cycle of obedience. Many boys never became masters at all. They remained journeymen, forever sleeping near someone else's oven. But you dreamed differently. You watched your master's hands, memorized every gesture, every flick of the wrist. You knew one day you'd build your own hearth, and maybe, just maybe, you'd let your apprentices sleep an extra hour. As the sky lightens, you wake your master. He inspects your work silently, running his thumb along the dough, then nods once. Approval, however small, feels like sunlight. Together you load the loaves, moving with unspoken coordination. The oven roars, the crusts bloom, and soon the scent spills into the alley.
When customers arrive, wives with baskets, monks with coins, you are invisible again, retreating to the back to clean and prepare for the next night. But there's pride in that invisibility. The townsfolk might never know your name, but they'll taste your work in every bite. By afternoon, you collapse beside the oven, curling up in your corner of warmth. The bricks are still hot, humming softly beneath you. You dream of firelight and flour dust, of laughter echoing off stone walls, of a future where you'll teach others to do what you once endured. Outside, the market grows loud. Inside, the last coals fade to ash. For now, you sleep, not deeply, but enough. Tomorrow night, you'll wake again to tend the living fire. You'll rise before the bread does. You'll watch and wait and learn. Because in the end, every master baker is born from one long, sleepless watch.
You breathe in, and the air tastes of 1,000 things. Warm bread crusts, damp wood, the faint sour of yeast, and something less noble, the musk of rats. It's the unmistakable scent of a medieval bakery at night, part heaven, part hazard. You've learned to tell the difference between a fresh batch and one that's been tainted by the faint, bitter smell of gnawed grain. The line between wholesome and horrid is thinner than a breadcrumb on a dusty floor. The bakery is alive in more ways than one. The heat from the oven creates a strange ecosystem. Mice love the warmth, rats love the leftovers. Even the cats that hunt them seem half-camed by the glow of the coals. You can hear them all if you stay very still. The scurry, the tiny scratching behind the grain barrels, the thump of a loaf sliding off its board. You roll your eyes and mutter, "Another thief," tossing a pebble toward the noise. Nothing scurries faster than a guilty rat. People today imagine medieval kitchens as filthy, disease-ridden chaos. The truth is subtler. Bakers were, surprisingly, cleaner than most. The town depended on you after all, and no one would buy bread that smelled like rot. Every morning, before the new dough was mixed, you swept the floors with brooms made of twigs bound by twine. Then you splashed the stone with warm water, rarely soap, but sometimes a sprinkle of ashes or vinegar. It wasn't perfect sanitation, but it kept the smell tolerable. Your hands tell the story best. They're rough and cracked, whitened with flour that never quite washes off. You scrub them in a wooden basin by the door, the water turning cloudy after each rinse. Sometimes you wonder how clean the water itself is, but there's little choice. Wells are shared and pipes don't reach this part of town. You've heard of Roman aqueducts, long-gone marvels, and you half wish they still flowed just so you could wash properly after a long shift.
Flour dust floats everywhere, coating every surface like snow. You've learned not to inhale too deeply. Too much of it burns your throat and makes your nose itch for hours. When sunlight hits the air, the particles turn golden, swirling in slow motion like tiny spirits. It's beautiful, in a choking kind of way. But beneath the wonder is rot. The corners hide stale dough, lumps fallen from last night's work, now crawling with tiny beetles. You sweep them out as best you can. The town's ordinances require cleanliness, at least on paper. In practice, clean means passably unoffensive. The inspectors care more about the weight of your loaves than the smell of your storeroom. To fight back against pests, you keep a cat. Two, actually. One lazy, one fierce. You feed them scraps of bread soaked in broth, and in return they keep the rat population from growing too bold. The cats are small legends in the street. Children know them by name. The fierce one, called Ember, has a torn ear and an unmatched glare. The lazy one, Crumb, prefers sleeping on the flour sacks, his fur white as sugar. Between them, they maintain a shaky truce with the mice, hunt enough to keep balance, but not so much that the pantry goes silent, because a bakery without mice, oddly enough, feels wrong, too still, too empty, as if the bread itself has lost its audience. The smells shift as night deepens. At first, it's fire and flour, simple and clean.
Then, as dough ferments and ovens roar, the air thickens with a tang of smoke and sour yeast. By dawn, it's intoxicating, a scent so rich that even the poorest passerby might close their eyes just to inhale it longer. For a moment, hunger becomes hope. Bread scent was, in its own way, medieval perfume.
Of course, not every bakery smelled divine. Some reeked of scorched crust, spoiled milk, or damp grain. When the weather turned humid, the flour could go bad overnight. You'd open a sack and the stench would hit you like a slap. Musty, clinging, faintly rancid. You'd know instantly the grain had been stored too close to the river. You might try to salvage it, drying it near the oven's warmth, but often it was too late. Waste was a sin, though. If the grain wasn't fit for bread, it went to pigs, or, if you were particularly desperate, mixed into loaves for the prisoners' rations. You still remember one particular night when the rats got bold. A storm had blown in from the west, rain pelting through every crack in the shutters. The bakery was damp, the fire struggling to stay alive. You dozed for a moment, and when you woke, there was movement. A rat the size of your forearm perched brazenly on the cooling rack, nibbling a crust. You lunged, missed, and cursed so loudly the cats scattered. The next day your master laughed and said, you've met the tax collector. Humor was your best defense against the filth. There were sayings for every situation. Where there's flour, there's life. Or, a rat in the grain means good luck for the cat. You learned to shrug, to laugh, to find poetry in the grime. Because beneath it all, there was an odd kind of order. Each sound, smell, and creature had its place in the bakery's ecosystem.
Historians still argue whether medieval bakers truly cared about hygiene or simply tolerated filth better than modern people. Some point to city records, fines for foul odors or unclean ovens as proof of regulation. Others note that microbial fermentation might have done more for sanitation than any broom. The natural acids in sourdough, after all, killed off bacteria without anyone knowing the science behind it. You like that thought, the idea that your bread kept people healthy by accident. Toward dawn, you take a deep breath and try to separate the scents. Smoke, salt, sweat, something sweet, something animal. It's the smell of work, of survival. You glance toward the window and see the first streaks of light painting the flower moats gold again. The rats retreat to their burrows, the cats stretch and yawn. You're left alone with the fading heat of the oven and the smell of bread cooling. A small, perfect victory in a world that never stops hungering. You lie back against the wall, too tired to care about the grit on the floor. The warmth seeps through your bones. Tomorrow you'll sweep again, curse again, and laugh again when Crumb trips over a broom handle. But for now, the night scents settle around you like a blanket. Earthy, imperfect, human. And if heaven has a smell you think as your eyes drift shut, it probably starts here. Half yeast, half smoke, and just a hint of cat fur.
The night settles into its soft flower-scented rhythm, and the town begins to stir again. You've been awake long enough now to understand that bakers live in reverse. Their dawn is your midnight, their sunset your afternoon nap. Outside the small shop, lanterns sway like sleepy fireflies, and the cobblestones echo with the uneven tap of cartwheels. It's market time again, though the sun won't rise for hours. You push open the wooden door and step into the cool street. A faint mist hugs the ground, carrying the tang of yeast and smoke. Along the lane, other bakers are lifting shutters, yawning and hauling trays of bread out into the open. The air is thick with contrast, darkness and work, fatigue and laughter. These are the night markets, those curious gatherings that kept medieval towns alive before dawn ever thought to show its face. In the flicker of torchlight, neighbors appear, brewers lugging casks, milkmaids clinking pails, a bleary-eyed butcher wiping his hands on an apron that has seen better centuries. Everyone moves by instinct. Deals are struck in murmurs. Coins jingle like distant rain. A stray cat winds between your legs, patient as only a creature of the alleys can be. You can't help smiling. This, too, is community. The strange, upside-down heartbeat of a town that never truly sleeps. While nobles and clergy dream behind heavy curtains, the real machinery of survival grinds on right here among the ovens and stalls.
And oh, the smell! Bread mingled with onion, damp straw, tallow candles, horse sweat. It's unpleasant, intoxicating, human. Someone jokes that bakers are lucky. They always get the first warm meal of the day, even if they're too tired to chew it. A man selling eels stops by your stall. He looks like he hasn't blinked since Tuesday. Warm bread? He grunts. You nod. A quick exchange. 1 loaf for 2 eels, still squirming in a bucket. He walks off humming. Somewhere, a rooster mistakes a torch for sunrise and lets out a hopeful crow. Everyone laughs softly, the kind of laugh that comes from shared exhaustion. Historians still argue whether these markets were officially sanctioned or merely tolerated. Records show periodic attempts by city councils to ban night trading, citing noise, theft, and disorderly spirits. Yet the bans never lasted. The simple truth? People were hungry before dawn, and bakers had the bread ready. Economics, like dough, tends to rise no matter what rules you set on top of it. At the edge of the market, a guard trudges past, his spear scraping the stones. He pauses by a stall, accepts a bun, and mutters something about thieves who steal not gold, but loaves. You've heard stories, hungry children slipping through shutters, desperate families caught pocketing crumbs. The penalties are brutal. Still, many bakers turn a blind eye. A bit of stolen crust means one less ghost haunting their conscience.
The ovens behind you rumble softly, alive even now. Inside, an apprentice tends the fire, his eyes half closed. You can tell he's fighting sleep. He leans against the wall, listening to the muffled hum of buyers outside. For him, this is the hardest hour, the stretch between night's deep silence and dawn's first gray. You remember your own first years, how the brain fog felt like fog itself, thick and endless. There's comfort in rhythm, though. After years of this life, your body adjusts, sinking to the town's inverted pulse. You sleep when others rise, eat when others pray, joke when others collapse. The rhythm becomes a lullaby of its own. Nearby, a woman with a wicker basket nods towards you. "You're the one who sleeps by the oven," she says with a smile. It's not an accusation, more like an amused curiosity. Everyone knows the bakers who curl beside their fires, half for warmth, half for watchfulness. "Doesn't it get too hot?" she asks. I shrug. "Only if you roll too close." She laughs, shaking her head. There's an ease in these exchanges, a sleepy humor that binds the neighborhood. They might grumble about the smells or the noise, but they know who feeds them come morning. When the first church bell rings, they'll already have your bread on the table. Some nights, quarrels break out, the butcher accusing the brewer of spilling ale over his stall, the candlemaker claiming someone borrowed her wax molds without asking. Voices rise, echoed down the narrow lanes,
and then fade just as quickly. Tempers cool with the next breeze. After all, everyone's too tired to hold a grudge. You glance up. The sky has begun to pale, just barely. The moon droops toward the horizon, lazy and round. A bell tolls from the church tower, 4 in the morning. Time is flexible for bakers. You mark it not in hours, but in loaves. By now, the third batch should be cooling. The next one must go in.
You return to the shop. The door creaks, and a puff of warm air greets you like an embrace. The apprentice straightens at once, startled, pretending he hadn't been nodding off. You say nothing, only pass him a roll, still warm, still fragrant. He grins, cheeks flushed by the fire. Outside, the market begins to thin. Customers drift home, arms heavy with bread and onions. The hum quiets to a low murmur, then fades entirely. Soon the streets will belong again to the rats and the fog. The neighbors retreat to their beds, the last flickers of candlelight vanishing from windows. A few shouts linger, a drunken song, a baby's cry, the rhythmic clop of a horse returning to the stables. Then even those fade, replaced by the deep, even breathing of a sleeping town. Back inside, you rake the coals, coaxing the fire to a lower glow. The oven gives a soft sigh, like a tired beast settling down. You spread your blanket on the bench beside it, the one spot where warmth meets shadow. As you lie down, the scent of baked crust wraps around you, comforting, familiar, ancient. You can still hear the market faintly, a memory more than a sound. A stray thought crosses your mind. In a few centuries, night markets will vanish, replaced by gas lamps, clocks, and noise laws. But for now, this quiet half-world between darkness and dawn is yours. You close your eyes. The fire hums low. Somewhere outside, a lone rooster tries again. Still too early, still wrong. You smile. The town will wake soon, and the world will start over. For now, you drift beside the oven, between the smell of ash and bread, between sleep and duty. The world of trade, beads, and gold slowly fades as your imagination moves closer to home, to the villages and towns where ordinary people live with extraordinary beliefs. You trudge along a dirt path lined with clay huts, their smoke curling lazily into the night sky. Here the forest whispers secrets. Every rustle in the leaves, every ripple of the river seems charged with unseen power. You're no longer just a traveler, you're a listener, attuned to a world where myth, superstition, and song are as vital as food or fire. You pass a small clearing where women are pounding millet, their rhythmic thuds echoing like distant drums. They hum between strikes, and each note is not just music, it's protection, a charm, a declaration that the world remains in balance. Scholars still argue whether these songs were primarily spiritual or practical, but you know from experience that in this place they are both. The melodies summon favor, ward off misfortune, and mark the passage of time. A man approaches with a lantern, his face lined and brown, his eyes gleaming under the soft light. He tells you a story about a crocodile that once rose from the river to judge the villagers. Children giggle behind him, daring each other to look into the shadows. You remember the crocodile dung sunscreen tale, how remedies and warnings could straddle the line between fact and folklore, keeping the community alive, attentive, and, if nothing else, entertained. Superstitions rule the rhythm of daily life. People carry charms of carved wood or glass beads, tied to wrists or belts. They murmur prayers before planting crops or crossing rivers. Some avoid particular paths on certain nights, fearing the spirits that wander invisibly. Even your own routine,
walking the village paths, is touched with caution. You step over cracks in the ground, pause when a bird calls twice, and never whistle after dark. Storytelling, however, is the most potent magic. Elders gather children around fires, recounting heroes and tricksters, gods and spirits. You lean against the nearest hut, listening to the cadence of their words, the rise and fall of each sentence, the punctuated laughter, the ominous pauses. Every story is a map of morals, a code of conduct, a warning, and a delight all at once. By the time the tale ends, the children are sleepy, their minds filled with wonder, their hearts trained to respect both nature and community. Songs accompany these stories, often hauntingly simple, sometimes startlingly complex. One you hear tonight is about a river that can swallow villages in a single flood if disrespected. The melody spirals upward, then falls like water hitting stone. You shiver, imagining the riverbank just beyond the trees, imagining the possibility of destruction, the certainty of respect. The song is both a lullaby and a warning. It tells you to tread carefully, but to marvel as well. Superstitions also manage relationships and conflicts. You watch a trader place a string of red beads outside his door, a charm against thieves. A neighbor leaves a small bowl of millet to appease ancestral spirits. The everyday actions of this town are soaked in meaning, layers of belief that outsiders would dismiss as quaint, but which keep the social fabric taut and resilient. You marvel at the efficiency of it. In a place without formal policing, morality, caution, and mutual respect are enforced through myth and music. You catch sight of a young girl weaving a small mat from palm fronds. She hums a tune that tells the story of a sunbird who stole the night from the moon. The pattern she creates mirrors the song's rhythm, each twist of the fibers echoing the note. You realize that here, artistry is inseparable from belief. Every object, every gesture is alive with narrative.
Even the food has stories. The bread, the roasted fish, the millet porridge, all are accompanied by rituals or rhymes meant to honor the earth, the ancestors, or the gods. You watch as an elder sprinkles a pinch of salt along the threshold before baking, both a practical measure and a magical one. It is a pattern repeated countless times, yet each iteration is vibrant, living, immediate. In this world, humor and fear coexist. Some myths are terrifying, a forest spirit that eats the unwary, a trickster that hides crops, but many are playful. Children are told that a mischievous spirit will tie their shoelaces together if they misbehave, or that a tiny invisible bird will sprinkle dust to make them sneeze until they apologize. These stories teach consequences without cruelty and weave lessons into laughter. Historians still argue whether these tales shaped behavior more than laws or formal governance. You think about it now, feeling the rhythm of the village, the pulse of the songs. Perhaps both are true. The stories keep people alert, the songs keep hearts aligned, and together they form an invisible architecture as powerful as any brick wall or statute. The night deepens, and you wander past the last huts, past the small fire where elders still murmur, past the quiet river reflecting the stars. You hear a lone flute drifting from somewhere deeper in the forest, its notes threading through the air like silver ribbons. You realize you've been listening for hours, and yet the world feels awake, alive in its subtle, layered ways.
Finally, you pause, sitting on a low stone. You breathe in the scent of earth, smoke, and night flowers. The village sleeps in patches. Here a faint snore, there a soft whisper. but the songs linger, the superstitions hum in the bones of the land. You feel the presence of a world that teaches, warns, and delights without ever demanding attention. And you too are a part of its rhythm, its pulse, its quiet magic. You breathe slowly, savoring the resonance of myth, music, and the soft guidance of belief. Somewhere a night bird calls, and the forest answers. Somewhere else a child hums the tune of the sunbird and moon, weaving imagination into form. The village, the forest, and even you are held together in this invisible net of stories and songs. And as your eyes begin to close, you feel the world exhale with you, soft, secret, eternal.
The night shifts once more, and now you move from the markets and songs into a quieter, stranger realm, the world of medieval medicine. You trudge past the baker's oven and the sleeping apprentices into alleyways where apothecaries keep their shelves stacked with jars, roots, and powders whose names you can barely pronounce. Here, the smell is sharp, a mix of herbs, vinegar, and something vaguely metallic. It smells like both healing and danger, the way you imagine a potion might taste if you dared sip it. You stop at a small wooden stall where a healer arranges dried herbs under a flickering lantern. He looks up at you with a faint smile, eyes bright despite the long hours. Ailments of all kinds, he murmurs, and you nod, knowing this is true. Fevers, headaches, cramps, and mysterious pains all find their way here. You glance at the shelves, powdered roots, vials of oil, dried flowers, and jars containing things you don't want to think about too closely. You recognize a few names: ginger for digestion, willow bark for pain, but many are strange and exotic, carried from faraway lands. The most common cures are curious to modernize. Leeches, for example, are everywhere. They hang in small jars of water, waiting to suck the sickness out of a patient's blood. You shudder slightly. And yet, it is effective, in a messy, slow sort of way. You imagine the townsfolk lying back on hard benches, nervously watching a slimy creature attach itself, the healer whispering chants and measuring their pulse. It's not comfortable, but sometimes it works. More unusual remedies abound. You see powdered mouse skulls meant to stop toothaches, dung-treated bandages for wounds, and a curious tonic made from roasted snake skins intended to improve eyesight. You wrinkle your nose, but the people here swear by these treatments. Some work, some don't, and some probably do harm. But in the absence of modern science, belief is medicine itself. Confidence, after all, is half the cure. The night shifts once more, and now you move from the markets and songs into a quieter, stranger realm, the world of medieval medicine. You trudge past the baker's oven and the sleeping apprentices into alleyways where apothecaries keep their shelves stacked with jars, roots, and powders whose names you can barely pronounce. Here, the smell is sharp, a mix of herbs, vinegar, and something vaguely metallic. It smells like both healing and danger, the way you imagine a potion might taste if you dared sip it. You stop at a small wooden stall where a healer arranges dried herbs under a flickering lantern. He looks up at you with a faint smile, eyes bright despite the long hours. Ailments of all kinds, he murmurs, and you nod, knowing this is true. Fevers, headaches, cramps, and mysterious pains all find their way here. You glance at the shelves, powdered roots, vials of oil, dried flowers, and jars containing things you don't want to think about too closely. You recognize a few names: ginger for digestion, willow bark for pain, But many are strange and exotic, carried from faraway lands. The most common cures are curious to modernize. Leeches, for example, are everywhere. They hang in small jars of water, waiting to suck the sickness out of a patient's blood. You shudder slightly. And yet, it is effective, in a messy, slow sort of way. You imagine the townsfolk lying back on hard benches, nervously watching a slimy creature attach itself, the healer whispering chants and measuring their pulse. It's not comfortable, but sometimes it works. More unusual remedies abound. You see powdered mouse skulls meant to stop toothaches, dung-treated bandages for wounds, and a curious tonic made from roasted snake skins intended to improve eyesight. You wrinkle your nose, but the people here swear by these treatments. Some work, some don't, and some probably do harm. But in the absence of modern science, belief is medicine itself. Confidence, after all, is half the cure.
You note the pervasive use of amulets, a piece of crystal worn on a cord, a pinch of salt in a pouch, a carved figurine placed under a pillow, all believed to ward off spirits and illness alike. The line between physical and spiritual health is thin. A headache might be a demon or a fever. Treat the body without appeasing the spirit, and the patient might relapse, or so the stories claim. You find yourself admiring the holistic logic. The body, mind, and soul are all part of the cure, whether the potion tastes foul or the ritual seems strange. Some of the oddest remedies are surprisingly practical. Honey, for example, is everywhere, applied to wounds, mixed in syrups or spread on bread as both sweetener and antiseptic. Vinegar, too, serves as a disinfectant. You notice how the real knowledge often hides among the eccentric, the magical, and the ceremonial. In a way, the bizarre practices create a framework in which practical methods survive, unnoticed but effective. The healer points out a remedy for nightmares, burning a small bundle of herbs near the bed while reciting a chant. You think about the bakers sleeping beside ovens. Their dreams must have been heavy with the smell of smoke and yeast. Perhaps these herbs work, perhaps they do nothing at all, but the intention alone seems to calm the spirit. Historians still argue whether medieval remedies were more psychological than physiological, and here you see the truth of both. Fear and hope are medicine in themselves. Quarantine methods also exist, though inconsistently. Those suspected of carrying contagious diseases might be confined to a single room or isolated in a hut outside town. You notice small chalk marks on the doors, warnings, instructions, symbols meant to protect the healthy. In a sense, the townsfolk understand contagion even if they can't define germs. Observation and caution have become rules etched into daily life.
You wander further and discover an herbalist's back room, dark and fragrant, filled with dried flowers, jars of preserved animals, and a small furnace. The apothecary explains that certain powders, when mixed in the right proportion, can aid childbirth or ease labor pains. Others help with colic or chronic coughs. He laughs softly when you ask about a remedy involving powdered owl bones. "Old wisdom," he says, shrugging. "Use it if you dare, or laugh at it. Either way, people believe." You notice one particularly fascinating practice: bloodletting with cupping glasses. A glass is heated and pressed against the skin, creating a vacuum. Sometimes a small incision is made and blood is drawn away. The theory? Imbalance in the humors causes disease. You shiver at the thought, yet you cannot deny the logic behind it. Excess of one humor could cause fever. Too little might bring weakness.
It is imprecise, sometimes dangerous, but grounded in careful observation over centuries. And then there's the collection of medical oddities meant to inspire awe or fear. Preserved serpents, mummified animals, and jars of unidentifiable substances line the shelves. One contains what looks like a small human hand, shriveled and dark. You ask about it. The healer smiles faintly. Protection, he says, or warning, sometimes both. You can't help but wonder if curiosity is part of the cure too. The mind engaged, the body attentive, ready to respond. Night deepens further, and you finally step back outside. The air is cooler now, carrying the scent of smoke, herbs, and distant bread ovens. Somewhere nearby a child coughs, and a mother murmurs a chant, blending belief, song, and action into one seamless ritual. The town sleeps uneasily, yet safely, guided by knowledge, tradition, and hope.
You exhale, letting your shoulders relax. In this world, medicine is not sterile or clinical. It is messy, fragrant, and profoundly human. It blends observation with ritual, practicality with superstition, fear with hope. You realize that even the oddest remedies serve a purpose: to anchor the mind, comfort the patient, and keep the body alive through uncertain nights. As you wander back toward the warmth of the baker's oven, you notice the rhythm of life remains constant. Ovens hiss, fires burn low, cats stretch, and somewhere a lantern swings gently in the wind. The town is alive with small miracles, every cough soothed, every charm worn, every song sung. And you too are caught in this net of careful observation, magic, and human persistence. You lie down beside the oven once more, hands smelling faintly of herbs from the healer's shop, heart warmed by fire, body steeped in the rhythm of a world where science and superstition coexist in delicate balance. You breathe slowly, imagining the jars, the powders, the chants. You imagine the healer's hands, steady even when the night is long, the patient's hearts, fluttering but hopeful. You let it all wash over you, and finally, your eyelids close.
As the night deepens, your wondering brings you back to the familiar hum of the oven, the warmth of hearths, and the invisible lines that shape medieval life. You step into the dim glow of a baker's kitchen, where the air is heavy with flour dust and the scent of rising dough. It is a space that is both intimate and revealing, a crossroads where class, gender, and labor intersect in quiet, powerful ways. You notice the apprentices, young boys mostly, moving with careful precision, stirring mixtures, shaping loaves, adjusting the fire. Their clothes are simple, patched and dusty, sleeves rolled up, faces streaked with the remnants of flour and sweat. Across the kitchen, the mistress of the house, or sometimes the baker's wife, manages the rhythm of work with a steady hand. She stirs, she kneads, she watches, sometimes correcting, sometimes encouraging. Her authority is real, though often informal, and it carries a weight that apprentices quickly learn to respect. The kitchen is a world in miniature. Class distinctions appear even here. A wealthy merchant's son might have a place by the table, supervised but spared some of the dirtiest tasks, while an orphan or a street child might toil from dawn till dusk, learning skill and survival at once. You notice subtle hierarchies, whose work is praised, whose loaf is selected first for sale, whose opinion matters when the fire is too fierce or the dough too wet. Even within this small, enclosed world, social order breathes and asserts itself. Women dominate much of the domestic and labor space, though their contributions are often invisible to the wider town. They grind grains, brew ale, wash linens, and crucially, manage the hearth, both the literal fire and the social one. The hearth is sacred here. It is warmth, sustenance, and survival. To tend the fire is to hold life itself in your hands, and the skill requires strength, patience, and a knowledge passed down from mother to daughter or from mistress to apprentice. You watch the rhythm of stirring, kneading, and tending. It is almost ceremonial, a choreography refined over decades.
Gender roles are enforced but flexible in moments of necessity. On a slow night, a boy apprentice might fetch water while the mistress shapes dough. Sometimes men are drawn into domestic labor when the workload swells or illness strikes. But these deviations are temporary, often grudging, a reminder of the larger social order that expects men in the public sphere and women at the hearth. Historians still argue whether these divisions were absolute or permeable, shaped by practicality as much as ideology. You can see both. The kitchen is both a prison and a stage, rigid yet dynamic. Class distinctions extend beyond the kitchen. You imagine a wealthy noblewoman's kitchen, larger, with more hands, perhaps an apprentice trained in manners and presentation as much as bread making. And you contrast it with a village hearth, where a single woman might rise at midnight to bake bread, churn butter, and tend children, the oven her closest companion. Here, every loaf carries not just calories, but social meaning, the proof of skill, care, and survival. You notice how hierarchy dictates rhythm as much as skill. The master baker's orders determine when the fire is stoked, when the dough rises, when loaves are removed for sale. Apprentices obey, but they also observe, learning subtle lessons about patience, timing, and expectation. The mistress ensures efficiency, but she also shapes loyalty and trust, often with soft authority that men in the town's public spaces cannot replicate.
The overlap of gender and class is nowhere more evident than in apprenticeships. A boy might be apprenticed to a wealthy baker in exchange for future profit, food, and lodging. He learns craft, discipline, and sometimes social graces. A girl might be apprenticed domestically, learning not only bread making, but household management, childcare, and the invisible labor that binds a home together. Both learn to navigate power, expectation, and responsibility. You watch the flicker of candlelight on the faces in the room. Sweat and soot-streaked, eyes focused, hands moving in perfect rhythm with the fire and dough. Occasionally someone laughs, a quiet release of tension. Perhaps a novice burns a crust or miscalculates the yeast, and everyone smiles, gentle and knowing. The humor is a subtle glue, bridging rank and role, reminding everyone that they share a fragile but essential labor. The hearth itself seems almost alive. The oven breathes heat. The fire crackles like a sentient being, and you notice how every person positions themselves relative to it. Too close, and the heat scorches. Too far, and the warmth fails to reach. The fire is an equalizer, a teacher, a monitor of skill. You realize that life here is measured not just in hours or coins, but in mastery of the hearth. You begin to notice small tensions, apprentices testing boundaries, women asserting authority in subtle ways, the master baker weighing experience versus obedience. And yet, there is also a fluidity born of necessity. When the town demands more bread, when ovens fail, when illness strikes, rigid roles bend. Men carry water, women lift heavy sacks of flour, apprentices knead into the late night. You see adaptability and hierarchy coexisting, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes elegantly.
Meanwhile, The social rituals surrounding bread reflect wider hierarchies. Who receives the first loaf? Who carries it to market? Who is permitted to taste? Is dictated not just by hunger, but by expectation, respect, and status. You watch the mistress pass a loaf to the master, then another to an apprentice, then one to a visiting merchant. Every exchange carries meaning, an unspoken map of social relations coded into gestures, timing, and attention. Even the smells tell a story. The scent of bread rising mingles with herbs, smoke, and wood. The aroma is both comfort and authority. Wealth and poverty, labor and oversight, gender and class, all are sensed as much as seen. You take a deep breath, letting it soak in. The kitchen is a microcosm, a small fiery universe where human organization, hierarchy, and creativity intertwine seamlessly. Finally, you lean back, near the hearth, but far enough to rest. You watch the apprentices yawn, the mistress smooth the cloth over the work surface, the master baker check the oven. The rhythm of class, gender, and labor continues, quietly yet powerfully, pulsing like your own heartbeat. You realize that the kitchen is not just about bread, it is about survival, education, socialization, and the subtle assertion of order within chaos. As you close your eyes beside the warmth of the fire, you can almost hear the soft murmur of centuries of kitchens, each telling the same story in 1,000 variations. Who feeds? Who tends? Who commands? Who obeys? And for a moment, you feel both an observer and a participant in this ancient, rhythmic, smoky dance.
The night has settled into a slow, rhythmic hush, and now your wandering takes you beyond ovens, hearths, and streets, into the world of images and words, the visual and literary landscapes that shaped medieval life. You wander past a quiet square where the church towers rise like silent sentinels, their spires cutting shadows into the cobblestones. Here, every painted panel, carved relief, and illuminated manuscript carries messages, stories, and reminders that life, death, and labor are deeply intertwined. You step into a small scriptorium, candlelight flickering across desks cluttered with ink pots, quills, and sheets of parchment. A monk bends over an open codex, carefully tracing letters with meticulous precision. The script itself is elegant, almost fluid, each stroke deliberate. Margins are alive with tiny illustrations, sometimes grotesque, sometimes whimsical, dragons, hybrid creatures, and mischievous faces that seem to peek at you, daring a double take. Even in a world where survival depends on labor, someone has taken the time to play with imagination. Illuminated manuscripts were more than decoration. They were a visual guide, a mnemonic toll for priests, scholars, and sometimes townsfolk who glimpsed their messages. You trace a miniature scene depicting the Last Supper, apostles frozen in mid-gesture, their faces full of expression, a tiny cat scuttling at the edge of the table. You smile at the detail. Someone, centuries ago, thought to animate even the background. Historians still argue whether these illustrations were instructional or primarily aesthetic, but you know they did both.
Nearby, a tapestry hangs across a wall, its threads glinting faintly in the dim light. The scene is a hunt, knights on horseback, hounds chasing a stag, forests embroidered with painstaking care. You run your fingers along the threads, not touching, of course, but imagining the hours of labor required to make something so large, so intricate. Every color, every twist, tells a story about class, leisure, power, and desire. Nobles are heroes. Peasants appear in the margins, sometimes faceless, sometimes sneaking glances at the viewer, reminding you that even in iconography, hierarchy matters. In another corner, you find a collection of carved panels, wood and stone. Saints, angels, and allegorical figures leap from the surface, their faces expressive, their gestures almost theatrical. A carving of a baker holding a tray of bread reminds you of your nightly companion, the oven. Here, labor itself is sanctified, immortalized in stone and wood. There's a quiet insistence that work, piety, and skill are interconnected. You wonder how many passerby paused long enough to appreciate the detail, and how many simply saw it as decoration. Then you notice the literature. Collections of fables, romances, and chronicles bound in leather and vellum. The words are deliberate, rhythmic, and rich with allegory. One story tells of a clever fox who outwits the king's hounds. Another recounts the adventures of a wandering minstrel, whose songs heal hearts as effectively as medicine. The writing is functional and entertaining, moralistic and playful, a mirror of society, showing its virtues, fears, and aspirations.
Quirky details abound. A marginal illustration shows a rabbit lecturing a group of monks. A subtle satire, no doubt, but a reminder that humor and critique existed even in solemn spaces. You chuckle, remembering the baker's apprentice who burned a batch of bread and earned a teasing nudge rather than scolding. Humor, it seems, transcends centuries. Historians still argue whether the primary function of literature was instruction, entertainment, or preservation of social norms. You consider a story about a noblewoman who cleverly disguises herself to enter a man's workshop, learning to knead dough and run the ovens. It's whimsical, improbable, and clearly didactic, an encouragement for wit, patience, and ingenuity. Yet, for a reader in the town square, it was also entertaining, a diversion from the grinding realities of daily life. You wander back outside, the cool night air brushing your face. The cathedral towers glimmer faintly in torchlight, and you notice carvings of grotesque faces at the base, peering down at the cobblestones. Gargoyles, saints, and mischievous imps all inhabit the shared visual vocabulary. Every figure communicates. Beware, aspire, laugh, endure. Even the stone seems to breathe a quiet narrative into the streets. You remember a miniature in one manuscript where a baker and a blacksmith sit at the same table, sharing bread. It is simple, unassuming, yet layered. It's a reminder that art, literature, and iconography are not separate from life. They mirror it. They record labor, humor, hierarchy, and devotion. And sometimes they preserve a fleeting human moment for centuries, waiting for someone like you to notice.
In the dim lantern glow, you imagine a child tracing the lines of an illustrated letter, learning to read while also absorbing the subtleties of social order. A clerk copying a text in the scriptorium might pause to smile at a mischievous marginalia. Each interaction, each moment is a small act of engagement with the larger story of human life, recorded meticulously so it might endure. Outside, the streets have quieted, though a distant drumbeat hums faintly from the town square, a reminder that performance, narrative, and ritual continue even as sleep approaches. You pause by the baker's oven, feeling the residual warmth, imagining how the stories, images, and symbols you've seen tonight
coexist with labor, superstition, and song. Each layer enriches the other. Iconography informs literature. Literature inspires ritual, and ritual animates daily work. As you settle near the hearth once again, you feel the soft connection between past and present, between image and word, between thought and action. The manuscripts, the carvings, the tapestries, they all whisper in low, enduring voices, reminding you that life is observed, recorded, and celebrated in many forms. Even in the quietest corners of the night, creativity and memory persist, carrying forward knowledge, humor, and humanity.
You exhale, letting the weight of centuries wash over you. Every carved figure, every illustrated letter, every woven thread is a message that survives the long night, waiting for eyes that will see, minds that will understand, and hearts that will feel. In this intricate tapestry of iconography and literature, you sense the pulse of an entire culture, alive even now, breathing softly in the shadows. And as your eyelids begin to droop, you feel the comforting rhythm of stories, images, and labor entwining. The night hums with a quiet reverence, the hum of candles, the sigh of parchment, the echo of laughter from long-ago markets. You lie down beside the fire, soothed, alert, and strangely connected to every hand that ever traced a quill, carved a relief, or stitched a tapestry in this enduring medieval world.
The night begins to loosen its hold, and you feel the slow pull of time carrying you toward the edges of the medieval world. You trudge down narrow cobblestone streets, past shuttered windows and fading lanterns, toward a horizon where hearths, ovens, and markets will give way to a new rhythm, the subtle march of modernity. Smoke still lingers in the air, but you sense a shift, the smell of coal and iron, of growing towns, of mechanized craft waiting just beyond the curve of the river. You watch a blacksmith hammer steadily, sparks flying. It's a familiar sight, yet something feels different. His tools are sharper, more standardized, the rhythm less improvisational. Nearby, a baker tests a new form of oven, a design rumored to retain heat better, reduce smoke, and speed production. Historians still argue whether these incremental changes or larger societal shifts drove the evolution of trade and labor, but you can feel the tension between old and new in every corner of the town. Apprentices learn more quickly now, taught by manuals as much as observation. You notice a young girl reading from a small booklet, eyes scanning lines while her hands knead dough. Literacy, once a rare privilege, spreads alongside technological tweaks, changing the hierarchy of knowledge. It is no longer enough to merely observe and imitate. Mastery now requires comprehension of written instructions, measurement, and calculation. The kitchen, the workshop, the marketplace, all are slowly becoming classrooms, laboratories, and testing grounds.
The streets feel busier. Carriages rattle over stones, bringing goods from distant towns. You notice merchants speaking in multiple tongues, negotiating faster, more efficiently, yet sometimes less personally. The old charm of the market, the intimate barter, the whispered deals, the human pause, is giving way to systems that demand precision, timing, and replication. You breathe in the smells of bread, spices, and smoke, noting the subtle difference. Progress carries efficiency, but sometimes at the expense of nuance and ritual. The artisan's world begins to intersect with industry. You watch a wheelwright testing a new design, a blacksmith forging iron with a mechanical bellows. Even the baker's oven hints at mechanization. There's excitement here, yes, a promise of productivity, but also anxiety. Some masters resist change, worried that efficiency might hollow out skill, that machines might replace knowledge painstakingly earned over decades. Others embrace it, imagining more bread for more mouths, more coins in their pockets, and a broader reach of influence. Class lines start to blur slightly, even as gender roles are contested in subtle ways. Women increasingly participate in workshops and small-scale trade, their presence acknowledged in town records and guilds. Apprenticeship systems expand, offering opportunities to those previously excluded, though inequality remains stubbornly entrenched. You notice a young woman carefully measuring flour and water by volume, not instinct, proof that knowledge is migrating from tacit to codified, from touch and observation to text and formula.
Urban planning begins to shape the town in new ways. Streets are widened slightly, sanitation improves, and the public square becomes not just a marketplace, but a hub for civic life. You see city walls reinforced with brick instead of timber, town gates rebuilt to accommodate carts and larger flows of traffic. These shifts are subtle but profound, signaling that human ambition, organization, and design are asserting themselves alongside tradition. You pause near a small schoolhouse, children gathering with slates and chalk. The master instructs them in arithmetic, spelling, and the basics of commerce. You recall the apprentices who once learned only by watching the master baker or blacksmith. Knowledge is no longer entirely oral or observational. It is written, transmitted, codified, and increasingly accessible. Historians still debate whether literacy alone or technological innovation spurred social mobility, but tonight you feel both forces converging. Trade networks expand, connecting towns and cities across regions. You imagine a crate of glass beads once traded on a Swahili shore, now passing through multiple markets, eventually reaching the hands of a merchant in a bustling European town. Information, goods, and people flow faster than ever before. The pace quickens, but some human patterns remain. Superstition, social hierarchy, humor, and ingenuity persist even as the mechanisms change.
Even leisure evolves. You watch a small troupe of performers, acrobats and musicians, entertaining a gathering crowd in the square. Their acts are scripted now, choreographed for larger audiences, unlike the spontaneous songs and dances of centuries past. Yet the laughter and wonder are the same. The human need for delight, for storytelling, for community persists. The tools and methods shift, but the heart remains recognizable. As you wander toward the outskirts of town, smoke trails from chimneys less familiar, carrying hints of coal, tar, and industry. You notice a faint metallic tang in the air, mingling with the lingering aroma of bread, herbs, and hearth smoke. The old world is not gone, but it is changing, folding into something larger, more complex. You realize that modernity is not an abrupt arrival, but a slow tide, touching ovens, streets, workshops, and lives with quiet insistence. You take a deep breath, feeling both nostalgia and anticipation. The medieval world, with its hearths, markets, superstitions, and songs, is still alive in these streets, yet it bends under new demands: efficiency, literacy, mobility, and mechanization. You sense the tension between memory and innovation, between hands-on skill and abstract knowledge. The town, like the world beyond it, is negotiating its future with one foot in tradition and one foot in change.
Finally,
You pause on a hill overlooking the town. Lanterns glimmer below, fires burn softly in kitchens, ovens glow, and the human rhythm endures. Progress hums quietly beneath the surface. New materials, new knowledge, new social arrangements. But the essence of life remains. Labor, laughter, learning, and adaptation. You feel the continuity of centuries, of ovens tended, songs sung, hens working, minds imagining. And as you let the cool night air wash over you, you understand that transition is never abrupt. Modernity grows slowly, woven into the patterns of everyday life, carrying forward the lessons, stories, and labor of those who came before. You close your eyes beside the baker's warm oven, listening to the subtle shift of time, the gentle pulse of human resilience, and the comforting rhythm of continuity in the midst of change.
The night has thickened to a velvet hush, and you find yourself walking slowly through the town one last time. The streets are empty now, the market stalls shuttered, the ovens cooled to gentle warmth. You feel the soft pulse of history beneath your feet, the echoes of countless hands kneading dough, tending fires, whispering spells, and singing songs. Even as the town sleeps, its life lingers, suspended in memory, in the faint creak of shutters, in the lingering scent of bread. You pass the baker's house, remembering the apprentices leaning over their loaves, the mistress adjusting flour in her careful, rhythmic way. You think of the women spinning, grinding, and stirring in the hearth-lit kitchens of countless homes, their labor unrecorded yet essential. You imagine the blacksmiths, the herbalists, the storytellers, all leaving traces that endure longer than bricks or parchment. The echoes are everywhere, folded into the stones, the smoke, the rhythm of the night. Above, stars pierce the sky like tiny candles, and the moon casts long, gentle shadows across the town. You hear the soft coo of a night bird, the distant splash of water in a small stream. Somewhere, a child turns in bed, murmuring a dream filled with the strange and the familiar, a fox outwitting hunters, a crocodile lurking in the river, a river that swells with both danger and promise. The stories, the superstitions, the songs, they ripple outward across centuries, touching ears and hearts you cannot see.
You wander past the scriptorium, where ink-stained hands once traced letters by candlelight. The manuscripts sleep now, but their images and words remain, etched in memory and imagination. Tiny illustrations of mischievous creatures, of saints and sinners, of bakers and merchants, all persist in the mind's eye, reminding you that the world is not only lived, but also imagined. Humor, moral instruction, devotion, and daily life coexist in these echoes, inseparable and enduring. In the quiet, you remember the oddities of medicine, leeches, powdered bones, herbal tonics, charms and chants. You think of the fear, hope, and determination that infused every gesture. The past seems alive, humming softly in the night air. Even the most peculiar remedies, the burned herbs for nightmares, the powdered snakeskins, the cupped and blooded patients, speak of a human desire to heal, to understand, and to survive. There is a strange beauty in the logic, the imagination, the courage behind every choice. You feel the traces of the Swahili shores, the distant clatter of beads, the glint of glass in lantern light, and the salt tang of the ocean. The traders, sailors, and storytellers, all part of a rhythm that spanned continents, connecting human lives through commerce, culture, and song. Even if the ships no longer sail in your imagination tonight,
The echoes remain, the pulse of trade, the sparkle of beads, the laughter and negotiation across coral cities.
Your steps bring you to the edge of the forest, where villagers once whispered superstitions, carried charms, and sang protective songs. The air is cool, alive with night sounds, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of crickets, the occasional distant hoot of an owl. You remember the children learning lessons, the elders teaching caution, the songs that eased worry and imparted wisdom. You realize that even the smallest details, humor, rhythm, fear, and hope, form a lattice that supports life itself. And you sense the slow turn toward modernity, the blacksmith testing new tools, the baker experimenting with ovens, apprentices learning from books as well as hands. The town is changing, yet the essence of human endeavor persists. Craft, care, imagination, resilience, humor. They ripple through the centuries like the soft pulse of an unseen drum. Even in the quiet night, these echoes remind you of continuity, of lessons learned and passed on, of skill preserved in every loaf, stitch, and stroke of ink. The wind shifts, carrying the smell of smoke, herbs, and faint spices. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sensations wash over you. The warmth of the hearth, the rhythm of song, the sigh of the town, the faint echo of trade from distant lands. You feel a comforting sense of connection, a thread tying the present to a vast, invisible tapestry of human life, labor, and imagination.
You pause before the last house, where a single lantern glows in the window. Inside, someone might be reading, kneading dough, telling a story, or humming a tune. The fire flickers, shadows dance across the walls, and you realize that every act, every song, every gesture, every laborious step is part of a rhythm that spans centuries. Even if the world has changed, these echoes remain, shaping lives in ways subtle and profound. Your breathing slows, the town exhales with you. The ovens, now gentle and warm, the hearths, now quiet, the manuscripts, now resting, the workshops, now empty, they all seem to hum softly together, a lullaby composed of centuries of human ingenuity, care, and persistence. You feel the weight of time in the best way possible, comforting, enduring, gentle.
And as you finally lie down near a softened patch of earth beside the baker's quiet oven, you let your mind drift. You remember the apprentices, the mistresses, the traders, the healers, the children, the storytellers. You remember the laughter, the songs, the tiny mishaps, the magical rituals, the clever tricks, the quiet devotion. Each life, each choice, each tiny echo of human effort pulses faintly in the air around you. The night folds around you like a blanket. You breathe in the stories, the scents, the rhythms, the songs, the warmth and the imagination of centuries past. You feel suspended in time, safe and comforted by the knowledge that human creativity, care, humor, and resilience endure. The echoes settle softly, a lullaby of labor, belief, and love, carrying you gently toward sleep.
The night softens further. You sink into the quiet, letting your thoughts drift like smoke curling from a dying fire. Every sound, every shadow, every faint scent of bread or herbs feels distant, softened, like memories you've always known. The world seems infinite, yet gentle, stretching across forests, seas, streets, and hearths, carrying the pulse of lives long past and present. You are cradled in that rhythm, soothed by its continuity. Imagine the oven's warmth fading to embers, the lanterns dimming, the manuscripts and carvings resting until the next curious eye discovers them. The laughter of children, the songs of laborers, the whispered charms, they linger softly in the spaces between walls, trees, and stars. Time slows, each heartbeat, each exhale, each gentle thought becomes a thread, weaving you into the tapestry of human endeavor, patience, and imagination. You feel the echoes settle, gentle but persistent, carrying lessons of resilience, care, humor, and ingenuity. The superstitions and rituals, the songs and stories, the labor and art, they all converge in the hush of night, assuring you that even as the world changes, these threads remain unbroken. You inhale, soft and slow, letting the subtle pulse of centuries soothe your mind. Now, the night holds you, tender, quiet, endless. The world hums softly, the hearth glows faintly in memory, and the gentle stories of life, labor, and belief fade into a calm rhythm. You are safe, you are connected, and as your eyes close completely, the echoes of history, laughter, toil, and imagination carry you gently into sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.